As you can see, it's sort of a shitty rainy day out today, and I didn't feel like getting my ass wet outside on that chair, so we're shooting in the nondescript gray corner today. The DLC's been out for a bit, and my Elden Ring fever has frankly yet to wane. I've even been doing a little seamless co-op run, which has frankly been a blast. Holy shit. This place is now beautiful.
Oh, you know what? On the dog. I bawled on his stupid ass.
I was doing some thinking about the sort of story points of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and I kept coming back to that last fight. Promised Consort Radahn. It seemed to set some people off. Some people said it was a little too member-berry-y for their tastes. Other people complained that it didn't wrap up the Godwin plot, but personally I thought it was great. I wanted to try to articulate why. One thing that I particularly loved, and frankly sparked this entire video's concept, was the soundtrack for the fight. The DLC had some great music, and I honestly think it might be up there with some of the better FromSoft soundtracks, and I think that's saying something. The theme for the first half of that fight specifically starts off really martial, which is perfect for the idea that we're fighting the great General Radahn, not the half-disabled, scarlet-rotted remnants of the man. Once Miquella shows up, the second half of that song adds in the angelic choir parts, the higher ends of the choir, which really fits his sort of otherworldly, ethereal nature. It's a great song, seriously. If you haven't listened to it, if you have a long drive coming up, throw that on. It's good stuff. The weird thing that I noticed about it is that it's oddly hopeful, a little too heroic, and even kind of desperate, which sort of clashes with Miquella's goals here. If you haven't seen my other video on the DLC, I made a pretty firm argument for the fact that it seems like Miquella's trying to mind control the entirety of the lands between and create his perfect order, Age of Compassion. This is not like a new, fresh idea or anything. It seems to be the general consensus of some parts of the Souls community right now. So in hindsight, with regards to the soundtrack, you'd think there'd be more of an underlying sinister note that just seems to not be present. Now the mismatched heroic theme could just be another avenue of displaying Miquella's abilities, i.e. he's even charmed the orchestra. What the hell? Look, I also realize that the soundtrack might just be big and bombastic because it's the end of the DLC. It's going to be this big spectacle fight. I know I'm over-intellectualizing a little bit, but that's the brand. I like reading this theme as the soundtrack for our fight, specifically with the duo, more so than any of the other boss tracks on the album. The song seems to be as much about the player's mission there as it is about Tricky Mickey and Rowdy Ratty. Ostensibly, the Tarnished mission seems to be to stop the Age of Compassion from going forth because it would clash with whatever ending we chose in the base game. Those being Uninformed, Based, Simp but Smelly, Incel, and Doomer, in that order. In my opinion, FromSoft's games always have something to do with the human condition. I can't speak for Sekiro or Bloodborne because I didn't end up playing those, but I can talk about the Souls series through and through. I played those a number of times. Dark Souls was essentially about the cycle of life and death, with Hollowing being a clear allegory for the death of the soul, or the death of ambition, i.e. living after you've lost your purpose is a hollow, pointless endeavor. You go crazy, which is why Hollowing is a curse by that game's logic. So, in Elden Ring, if Miquella is fighting for an age without choice, and we're fighting for any number of reasons, I would argue that this game's DLC is about choice. That final fight is essentially a battle for free will itself, and if Ansbach is there, he'll even say so. Righteous Tarnished, become our new lord, a lord not for gods, but for men. What a fucking raw line. I think he's saying in not so many words that this should be a age for the people, not for some all-powerful godlike being to lead everybody down whatever path they choose is the best. The soundtrack just oozes this you want the world, well you can't have it kind of vibe to me. And this whole fight is essentially our Tarnished declaring, you guys had your turn, it's the little guy's turn now. Following that line of thinking, I think the main NPC storylines have never been more important to the full picture than in Shadow of the Erdtree. Hence why the fight with Lita and her little cohort is so front and center. You have to fight them right before you go in to fight the final boss. For instance, every NPC that opposes you in that final confrontation is a twist on an archetypal, heroic, or sympathetic character. The devoted paladin, the loyal warrior, the lovable simpleton, the driven revenger, and the strong silent type. But they all end up on the wrong side of history at the end of the day. Lita's devotion turns into misguided dogma. Freya is loyal to someone who is frankly just a husk and not in there anymore. Don't worry, we'll get to Radahn. Mor has been led along, the Hornsent has let his quest for revenge consume him, and Dane... Hey, what's up with Dane? They've all had their value systems sort of corrupted or twisted to convince them to give up their autonomy. They also allowed the worst aspects of their nature to consume them. On our side, at the end of the DLC, are Ansbach and Thalia. I hope I'm pronouncing Thalia right, but Ansbach served Bloody Murder Man, and Thalia is a sleep junkie who just wants to live in his coping mechanism forever. But Ansbach turns out to be a rational, honorable, well-put-together dude. He doesn't even hold a grudge against us for killing Moog. Thalia acts like a selfish brat, and he's a little, dismissive about his own abilities, but at the end of the day, after faced with the hard truth about St. Trina, he eventually comes around. All of these people had the choice to examine their actions, to introspect and decide what the right course of action would be. But it was Ansbach and Thalia who came out on top at the end of the day. Arguably, Miquella is also misguided in this instance. He's probably just playing out this foolish childhood fantasy that has boiled over and might have disastrous consequences for the world of the Lands Between at large. Ironically, it's the more overtly unheroic or unlikely characters who end up on the right team at the end of the day. And also ironically, it's Lita and her crew who exemplify Miquella's point the best. Their free will led them down a path that would rob the world of Elden Ring something that I consider fundamental to the human experience: agency. Intensely important to the human condition is the question of fate. I.e., are we free to choose our direction in this life, or is everything predetermined and laid out for us? Are we just going through the motions? The two sides of that final battle could be seen as the two halves of that philosophical conundrum. We're literally fighting a god who wants to institute predetermination, as in, I'll take care of everything about your life for you, don't struggle. I think in this world, the real world that is, true evil is a very rare thing to find, which is why, megalomaniacal dictators and serial killers, those people are studied profusely because they're weird, they're the outliers. Things oftentimes come in shades of gray, and otherwise good people can be beaten down on by the world and be made to do awful things. But I also want to believe that the opposite can be true, that people can make stupid, rash decisions and be redeemed at the end of the day. Not in a religious, Christian redemption or anything. I'm not religious. I'm just saying atone for your actions. Not religiously. Whatever. You get it. That's the double-edged sword of being a real person. It's not always so black and white, and I think George R.R. Martin captures that spirit very well in most of his stories. I tried not to slip him into this script, but I couldn't help myself. Sorry. Whether or not he had anything to do with the relatively minor task of putting together NPC questlines, I think FromSoft's writers did a great job of creating some characters who fit nicely into that mold. Alright, that was the big point, but I do have a couple minor things to touch on. I saw some people trying to poo-poo on Radahn's presence in the DLC, calling it fan service or insinuating FromSoft was cashing in on some member berries or whatever. I don't think that's the case. Leaving aside the fact that FromSoft is the company that produced Dark Souls 3, a game largely about letting stagnant, overindulgent stories die so you can create new stuff, I think Radahn was always going to be there. It's a tried and tested trope in stories, every story, fantasy stories mostly, that a character will die early on in the plot only to fantastically return in a surprising fashion later on. It was a twist. Melina whispering in Radahn's ear in the reveal trailer is sort of the dead giveaway to me. It always stuck out as a story thing that we never got full context for, and here that context is after the advent of the DLC. A small thing that I found interesting is that the Miquella-Radahn combo directly mirrors the Marika and Godfrey setup. You have a detached, sort of ethereal leader and a warlike conqueror who's going to bring the old world to heel. And if the story of Elden Ring is really trying to get us to examine governments that overthrow the previous regime only to end up like them at the end of the day, I think that's a nice little nugget or plot detail to point out. I can't wait for society to collapse so my ideology can rise from the ashes type beat. Okay, this is a bigger one, but another point of contention was whether or not Radahn was going along with all of this stuff, or whether he was charmed by Miquella, and If you watch the other video, you know that I lean towards the latter. I think he was charmed. I don't think Radahn would do any of this stuff. I did think I made a pretty strong point, but I just have a couple more pieces of evidence that I want to use to try and beef up that assertion. Because I noticed a couple things when I went back and I watched the cutscene that plays when you fight Radahn and Miquella again. Just a couple things stood out to me. At the beginning of the fight, Radahn is standing all stoic, and he does his like gravity sword flourish thing that he does, and you know, he's wearing his armor, and he's acting and moving around like Radahn would do. He's casting spells, gravity magic, all that stuff. The music's all martial, and there's all these visual signifiers that are letting us know that this is Radahn. But remember, Radahn's soul is not back in that body yet. Like, Miquella hasn't come back from beyond the Gate of Divinity, so it's essentially just still Mohg's corpse wearing armor that looks like Radahn's, puppeted around by what I assume to be Miquella's magic. Given that Miquella has what I consider to be a sort of unhealthy obsession with Radahn, this is sort of like the demigod equivalent of making your own personal action figure. Like, he might be doing all of this Radahn type stuff because that's how Miquella wanted him to be, when in reality he had the real Radahn like disfigured and driven crazy because he wanted this godhood plan thing to work out the way that he wanted it. Then there's this moment that happens during the second phase of the fight, and I can't help but think about the exact sequence of events. The puppet Mohg/Radahn is fighting us. Then the second phase of the fight kicks in after we get him down to a certain amount of health. Radahn's soul enters his body, and he starts burning with this like bright red flame. And he almost looks... Does he look kind of pissed to you? That's certainly what like the rumbling in the soundscape and like the underlit red lighting seems to suggest. Then Miquella returns from beyond the Gate of Divinity. He starts speaking to Radahn, and then that red glow is sort of subsumed by white light, and it almost looks like Radahn slackens a bit, like he's been soothed. This, in my mind, this exact sequence of events is kind of like the surefire giveaway that Radahn has no agency in this situation, and that he's being made to like waltz to Miquella's tune or whatever. Again, just a small little thing, but it does help confirm that. And that seems to be it for all my little points, I think. Alright, I'm just going to do a little channel business now, so if you don't care about that, you can head out. That's alright. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Might be a minor little hiatus on the channel after this video comes up, because I am trying to work on getting some bigger projects that I'm working on done, namely a retrospective review on the first Malice Darkblade book, The Demon's Curse. I really like Malice. He's like one of my favorite Warhammer characters, and I wanted to do him a little bit of justice, so that's going to be a bigger project. Also, the real big thing that's going to take some time is if you've seen the Star Sector videos on this channel, I am making a video in that style on the popular Mountain Blade Warband mod, Prophecy of Pendor. The first chapter of that video is up on my Patreon. It's like 20 minutes or so, and I might put up the rest of the chapters up there. We'll see. But that's going to be well over an hour long, so it's going to take some time to edit that one together, because I want it to turn out nice. It's turning out pretty good as is. But I can't wait to share that one with you guys. Of course, before we go, as always, thank you to Ben Couch. You're the man, dude. Consider checking out the Patreon, I guess. It's mostly just updates and the occasional behind-the-scenes thing. It's only $5 a month if you're into that kind of thing. Alright, I'm done hawking my wares. If you like this kind of videos, subscribe. I make more stuff like this. And hopefully, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.